Okay, so we got a little bit of a concept here. We got Thanos and Athanatos. Obviously, Thanos means something more in the realm of death or embracing death. And by today's modern culture standards, we know that there's a character that embraces this kind of mindset, this kind of ethos, or this kind of difference in, what could be expressed as a comic book character. Obviously, I'm playing on a bit of the character from the Marvel movies. So, with Thanatos, you have the concept of the Greek god of death, right? So the Greek god of death is embraced in a way within these Marvel movies with a man, or, well, an outer space alien, really, who wields a gauntlet. And in a way, embraces a very demonic or a very cathartic presence in the universe, because you have these heroes, multiple heroes, who are flawed human beings trying to fight against and or stand up against his tyranny. So this tyranny, in a way, it symbolizes that it comes from, a heavenly place, a heavenly realm, up above, out in outer space, right? So it has something to do with the concept of the heavens, right? But this Thanatos, this death, which, Thanos is just another embracing of like an angel of death. So it's just another way to say, Thanatos is the Greek god of death. Athanatos is immortal. So you have these concepts at play here of, somebody like sacrificing themselves in an immortal way. So you like Tony Stark, character played by Robert Downey Jr., or like Armageddon, Bruce, the character played by Bruce Willis. At the end of that, there would be high schools named after them, in memorial of their sacrifice for the human race, right? So in a lot of ways, I know those are ways to say, those are hypothetical, obviously, of characters, of fictional characters who died off, but this Thanatos, this embracing of the death, or embracing of that constant tyranny of death over us, obviously we embrace God. Obviously we turn to God because God is the answer to that. That's the Athanatos, right? The immortal path, the embracement of life. And that's just it, where that embracing of life is what God is what God represents. Now with these Marvel movies, it was very different, because you had the outright pop culture embracing of a character like Thanos. And with this embracing of a character like Thanos, which is really interesting, because when you think about it, I kind of played out these concepts before with the Humanist podcast and the Modernism podcast as it relates to humanism. So I'm kind of developing a theme throughout these podcasts and trying to break them up in bits by bits instead of just making it one long thing. And the problem with this is that it's this track, right? It's this track, or this embracing of this pop culture, where this pop culture thinks it's all right to embrace a concept like a character like Thanos, right? So because he's the Thanatos, he is bringing about death. He's bringing about tyranny. He is trying to rain it down from the perspective heavens in the Marvel universe, with these characters going against him. And could you even say these characters are in a way embracing the humanity, the human aspect of it, because it embraces the human spirit to fight against a tyrannical overlord? Sure, because that's what it is. They're fighting against this tyrannical overlord and Thanos, who is this imposing doom, this imposing figure, who wants to bring about the end, right? So he destroys, spoiler alert, 50% of existence, right? With his Infinity Gauntlet. And that's just it, where it's like you always have this in a sense to where this Thanatos this Thanos, this angel of death, brings about the constant death, right? The constant fear of death and not having any kind of salvation. So with this human spirit, with these various characters who not only sacrifice themselves, but for the greater good, they die so others can live on, which is a very noble thing to do, which is, in fact, it's a very human thing to do because, human beings die. And the shocking part about that is we give up, to give up the ultimate sacrifice yourself for others. That's a huge aspect. That's a huge aspect of humanity. That's part of what we're tied into. That's part of the fall. That's part of who we are. And just, like this humanistic aspect was, humanism is just another form of what embraces death. And this Thanatos concept is a concept that is a modality, or is a form, or is a synthesis of this embracing of this death. And it's not an embracing of anything that's new under the sun. It's embracing of something that is just completely obscure. And you think when it's, actualized in a cultural sense, like in these Marvel movies, people think that this is a new concept, and think that this tyranny is obviously going to be something that is prevalent, right? But, death is tyrannical. Death is something that stays with us. Death can be something that the more and more we embrace it, obviously the more and more hell we can cause ourselves to be. And then we cause ourselves to be imbued in that hell, and we cause ourselves to be ensnared by those powers and those principalities that aren't from God, that are from the Athanatos, or, the very denial of ourselves because we deny the theanthropic nature of Christ, and we get to the point to where the Thanatos is ruling over us. So that tyranny is stepping into play, that infinity gauntlet. See, and this is where these themes come into play. This is where this destroys any kind of concept to where we could embrace God, to where we could know God, right? To where we don't have the concept. We just think in pop culture. If in pop culture we think that, it's just okay. We can't separate any of this. Well, the problem is that if it isn't separated, then the fact that it isn't separated, it obviously hurts people. It obviously hurts them spiritually. It doesn't play to the fact that, we do have these human saviors, right? And that's a good thing. That's embracing of the human spirit, and that's recognizing our own to help us as heroes. Because obviously heroes need a struggle. Obviously the hero's journey in any kind of conceptualization of it, as South has Marvel has gone with their concepts, that a lot of these things with the various characters, there is a very humanistic approach to it. There is a very embracing of the fact that we ultimately do have to meet our Thanatos, angel of death, Thanos, however you want to embody it, into the fact that we have an answer for it, right? We have an answer for death being conquered by death because of Christ, right? So there is this aspect to it. And this humanistic aspect obviously plays on the concepts that I've talked about before. It plays on the concepts that I've talked about in previous podcasts, not only with myself, but with others. And obviously, there is a very strong striving for it, right? There is and trying to be there is trying for an understanding for it. There's pragmatism to it, but the Christian answer in a lot of respects, is the answer because of what and who we believe in, right? And then obviously Trinitarian, and being, there is all kinds of those concepts when it comes to the weird denominations of Christianity that really I don't understand some of them, and I kind of find the concepts to be kind of trivializing the Trinity, and trivializing in a lot of aspects to bring about an Athanatos to the different denominations of Christianity because of how exoteric the West has become, and to how, being an Orthodox Christian, that obviously there is something that's there that has or takes heed or takes an issue with what has become a self-destructive path with, what the West has presented. So now, speaking about a Marvel movie, I mean, it can't get any more consumeristic culture, more Western than what the Marvel movies represent, right? Because they represent a prepackaged approach to something that is an obviously big concept. You have space, you have time, you have all kinds of manner of what is supposed to be, struggle, a hero's journey, right? And these heroes are crusading against this tyranny. As always, represented, these heroes do crusade against tyranny. And that's, that's a good thing. That's a good concept. But the issue with this, and where it takes heed, is that it's completely self-reliant on humanity, right? And there's all these, obviously, all these different concepts at work here with the Marvel movies. But just as there's different concepts within various religions, within various systems, within various thought processes, within various stories. There's always those stories that are going to be, important to us because we're human beings, because on how we're built, on how we do see things, and obviously there's a mortality to it, there's a finality to it, that, if we didn't have those heroes sacrificing, we wouldn't have a concept of Christ's sacrifice for us, of what God sacrificed for us with his only Son. So now you have the tie-in with the Trinity with this because of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But now, outside of that, and what it brings about is, this Thanatos, right? This Thanatos that is always there. It's always prevalent in some kind of culture. If you embrace the world, then you embrace the culture that's of the world, right? So you're embracing something that isn't from God. You're embracing something that doesn't come from the Orthodox Church, right? Or whatever, kind of try to healthy church life you can have, or what kind of balanced life you can kind of have with others, and with yourself when it comes to that, right? And I don't want to get into the particulars of that because that's all obviously, with the concept of free will, it's obviously pretty important, right? So I don't want to get down that path too far because that's a whole different tangent. That's a whole different thing. But anyway, this embracing of what is potentially the thing that beats us down, the death that beats us all, right? Thanos, he's the angel of death. He's going to be the bringer of death to 50% of the universe or the galaxy or whatever kind of thing they had built up in the Marvel universe. I'm not really sure of all the particulars with that, and that's not really that big of a deal. It's kind of neither here nor there. But anyway, what's different is that it takes to the point where this Thanatos, this angel of death, this bringer of death, Thanos, is conceptualizing, or it's an embodiment of his destructive tendencies, the death that he brings to the rest of the universe. And once again, the answer for it is something that isn't divine, it's human. It's human beings with incredible powers. So I mean, you could like these demigods. Well, one of them is demigod, mythological Norse demigod Thor, who's from what they call like the multiverse. So there's now a multi-dimensional polarity to it, which is kind of different, but not really that conceptually different to Christians and anybody who is, who's very who's trying to conceptualize biblically what that means, or who's trying to conceptualize it of the world. I think obviously biblically we have a better understanding of it, and the concepts with that is just something that is at play here. And this play on this multi-dimensional, multiverse polarities, or the multipolarity is obviously something kind of out of Dugan's book. And I'm not gonna even compare or bring him into it because that's just ridiculous. But it is Kabbalistic, it is paganistic, it is wrong. It is not the proper way to synthesize what this is, because that's just bringing it more of into an ism, or it's bringing it into something that is more, well, I guess Thanatoistic. It's not from God, so it's not Athanatos. It's not immortal. It's not embracing of, a proper synthesis. It's a synthesis that's obviously very problematic, because once you have all these multipolarities, once you have all these multiverse, or all these, many, right? Then you have all these different concepts, and then you're like, oh, well, there's this answer to death. Well, there's this answer. Well, there's this, there's that. So, you kind of explore all those options, too. And it's like, going to a grocery store and saying, you got 5 different flavors of bags of potato chips, right? So, you can pick from one, and you can always pick your favorite, right? But maybe your favorite isn't the right answer either. I don't know, and that's another whole different tangent. But this concept kind of plays into it a little bit better than going down the multipolarity or multiverse concept of what Dugan brought about. And these concepts is being very humanistic. The answer is obviously Christ. The answer is obviously, to us as Christians, it's Christ. But the answer to the world is like, oh, well, there's this great big threat, Thanos, to the heroes of that perceived universe, or that perceived fictional world, and it brings about that destruction. He brings about that mortal fear, that fear of mortality, that he's going to destroy everything with his Infinity Gauntlet. And his Infinity Gauntlet is obviously powerful. It obviously has an effect on people. It obviously is going to destroy the universe. But it's not going to get anywhere with, the universe kneeling to him, because of his mind is already made up, because he wants to embrace, because he is the bringer of death, the angel of death, as a derivative of his name, which is Greek for the god of death. So you have to have that concept at play, because he's bringing it and symbolized by his name. So the problem with this is that you have that humanity. You don't have God within this. So it's kind of different. It's obviously a concept that is been played around with. It's been a concept that's obviously nothing new, because you're always going to have a villain to have heroes in a story. And that is something that's intrinsically human. That is something that is definitely a testament to what human beings can overcome in the human spirit. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's great. It's an expression of who we are. But it's obviously not all about just being a human being. And this is where I know that obviously comic books aren't going to be religious, but it's kind of strange because if you're going to bring a demigod into it, like Thor, then you're going to have obviously those kind of concepts at play, because they had the Asgardians, right? So you're going to bring in those mythical or folklorish concepts into it, and that's different. That's very different. That's giving it a different spin onto what could be another leg of where this journey is going. So when you embrace the world, you obviously embrace something that is not coming from God. And you embrace something that is of the culture, I guess you could say, or of something else that is extracurricular or ancillary to what the belief system should be. So when it comes to this whole play on Thanatos and Athanatos, is that it doesn't represent the immortal. It doesn't represent God. It represents something that is outside of God, outside of what the true calling is, and where spiritually things are at. And it could be used as a barometer. It could be used as a kind of barometer. Yeah, barometer or pressure gauge, or any kind of anything you can think of that I guess measures pressure, or any kind of measurement system, I guess you could say. But conceptually, what I mean by this is that culturally, Thanos has an impact, right? And then in many different cultures, Thanatos, or Thanos, or the Angel of Death, is prevalent. Just as stories of giant snakes, stories of Ragnarok, stories of all kinds of things. And speaking of Ragnarok, that is in a way to conceptualize God's dying, or death of the gods, or death of God, as Nietzsche was about a lot. So these concepts are all at play here. These concepts are all very important. But going into Athanatos, and more so what that represents, that obviously represents immortality. And in the mystical supper that is handed out in every divine liturgy, the only legitimate mystical supper, or the Eucharist, in the Orthodox Church, is that legitimacy. There's that legitimacy to, not only honor God, glorify God, and obviously be a part of something that is truly Athanatos. So that is truly immortal. That is truly something that is carried on. Nobody's going to remember the Marvel movies and all the woke nonsense that goes on in 20 years from now. Nobody's really going to care, about all of that. But Christ lives on forever. Christ lives on through the Eucharist. He is just as much alive today as he was when he died and resurrected on the cross. Right? So there is that immortal aspect to this. There is that immortal aspect to what even the heroes in that story represented. And the heroes do represent an immortal spirit. I guess an immortal human spirit in a way, because of how much they endured, right? Of how much they continued to carry on despite the gigantic odds against them, right? So it's important to note that the heroes of the story, more so the Avengers, which is kind of funny because they're avenging death, but yet at the same time, they all have to face their own, pretty much besides the demigods of the story. which is which in a way is back to that multi-dimensional, multi-polarity, multi, I guess multi-faceted aspect of those different dimensions, which is just more ridiculous cultural Gnosticism anyway. But regardless, this has an impact. This has an impact on how people think about these concepts, on how people think that these concepts aren't any different than they are in Christianity. Because they aren't, conceptually, they're not different to Christianity. They might be different when it comes to all of the nonsense, all of the unbelief, but the outright, I mean, it's easier to recognize outright deception than it is to recognize any kind of intrinsic deception. It's a little bit harder to point out, but regardless, I don't think that, there's some movies that are meant to intentionally deceive. I don't think the Avengers movies were intentionally deceitful, or, which is probably why I picked it, because it's just a hero story and them overcoming these giant odds to basically, well, when you got demigods in the story, I mean, Thanos is basically representative of a demigod. If you think about the Angel of Death and the many mythological pantheons of gods that he is represented in, Thor is kind of funny that, he brings a hammer to hammer down death. Trample down death in a way. But anyway, not to say that Thor is Christ, because Thor is definitely not a representative of that for sure. But anyway, this is besides the point. So what winds up happening is that when it's representative of Christ, and when it's representative of what the Athanatos brings to the table, it's representing that mystical separate. It's representing that lineage. It's representing that spirit, that same spirit that, well, the spirit of the age, which could be, geared towards somebody like Athanatos, versus that enduring human spirit that we share with God, because God made us, right? So, Athanatos, we're immortal. We live continually. We believe in eternal life because of Christ, because of God, because of believing in the Trinity, because of believing that we share, in fact, the fact that God became man for us, right? So, in various respects, there is a very important aspect to all this conceptually. And conceptually, there is a lot of paths for this to go down. And of course, I picked a pop culture reference. I picked a Marvel movie that probably is kind of ridiculous to some to pick. And, that isn't the right way to go about it, right? So, the concept here is that, people don't know what to believe in, right? They want to pick a movie and they think a movie is the right way to go about it. And belief in that story and belief in that movie and then belief in the heroes are all something that is obviously human. It's obviously a part of us, but it's also mixed in with that obviousness of who we should really believe in, and that's God. And that's the Christian God. It's not anything else. So when these podcasts, I guess, come to light and these concepts are brought into, the forefront and are more conceptualized with the aspects of Christianity to it, because this again will always be a more geared Christian podcast, obviously, but it also will have the tone of, or the undertones of, not negating the forest for the trees, because when you have the culture that's so prevalent, that embraces, I guess, Athanatos, death in a way, a conceptualization, a personification, a remembrance of, memento mori, but a various platitudes. I could probably come up with a lot of that, but that's not what's important. What's important is that there is the answer to this, right? There is the answer to, what we believe in when it comes to God, when it comes to these concepts, because we see these concepts play overall in something that is as visually appealing as a Marvel movie, but in reality, it should also be found, within us. It should also be found, seeking what's more powerful within us than just overcoming these great odds. Well, I guess it would be good to now by this point define Thanatos and Athanatos. So, Thanatos was the Greek god of death and the embodiment of that death, right? And is it a constant death? I don't know. Well, Greek mythology obviously had the concept of Hades, so they had a concept of hell already, or an underworld, but it wasn't necessarily a place of ill repute and eternal punishment. It was more so a forgotten underworld, a Tartarus, right? Whereas in the Christian mindset, it's a place of eternal damnation or eternal punishment. It's also a place that can be condemned as away from God, right? So people who are away from the light of God, the uncreated light, as us as Orthodox Christians more so believe in. That uncreation, that eternal life in Christ, in the Thanatos, it's an Athanatos. So by embracing death is, embracing that eternal death. By embracing an Athanatos, so an anti-death in a way, like we say in the Creed, conquer death by death, but also, if you think about it this way, it's not so much anti-death as it is in immortal life. It's in immortal life in Christ, and obviously a lot of Western Christianity, your Protestantism, your Catholicism, a lot of that is not, I guess, in the Greek mindset or in the theological or the Hellenic mindset. And obviously with paganism, people can point that out and say, well, paganism was just early Christianity, and Christ brought about more of a systematic way to, or the church made a systematic way for a money-making scheme, right? Or a money laundering scheme, or something of that to that modern effect, when they don't understand, obviously, the valid saints in the Orthodox Church, which pretty much, all of them are valid, more so than in Catholicism and in Protestantism, you don't even have it. There's been many stories, many miracles, many things that are proven in the Orthodox Church that aren't otherwise found in the Protestant or Catholic understandings of the West, right? So you have these to various degrees, and that is an expression of Athanatos. That is an expression of God, that these saints these people, these holy men and women of the church, are not only martyred for their faith, for them not to renounce Christ, but also of their bravery, their courage, their steadfastness, their basic, understandings of God. Like, I mean, then these could be some of the most, prime and complex theologians to some of the simplest people who only knew, one language and didn't write a whole lot of theological matters, church matters, or didn't even embrace what people would call, quote unquote, the modern world. So with that being said, is that this bridges the gap between Thanatos and Athanatos. And obviously I went on about the Marvel movie here, and how, Thanos embraces that death. And you could even use him as, the tyrant of the modern world, right? And that tyrant of the modern world, and it being something as problematic to the church, obviously. It's that Thanatos, it's that angel of death to try to bring Hades-like atmosphere within the church, or bring the church to Tartarus. Well, the problem is that Christ already conquered Tartarus. Christ already conquered hell. So the devil being conquered in this angel of death in a respect, or is more so, as a Father Seraphim Rose would pointed out, a spirit of an age, to a degree, as an attack on the church. The spirit of the age is always, the attack on the church, and the only church that's been, the two churches that have been subverted, the Western denominations, and the Orthodox Church, slowly is always trying to be subverted or attacked in some manner, shape or form. But that's, besides all the political stuff and besides all that, that's another tangent for yet again another day. I keep doing that with this podcast. Anyway, and it wouldn't be like me to not do that, right? But anyway, the contextualizations here is that these the Thanatos, right? So the embracing of this death is very problematic. It's very problematic to the Christian faith. And an Athanatos, as we say in the Trisagion prayer, or in just chanting, in Orthodox chanting, an Athanatos is because Christ said death to the world, as our ascetics and monastics do have that mentality, right? And people try to escape in other ways, escape in other fashions. And I'm not saying, you need to be a complete ascetic to obviously be, holy. But even with seeking the kingdom of God, obviously there are rules, there are regulations. But the expression of that in orthodoxy obviously is a bit different. I mean, it's an ethos, as Father Peter Ayers has pointed out, but there's also not only an ethos, but there is more of a complexity to it. There's more of a rigorous nature to it. There's more of an obvious expression of it that is not found in any other faith, right? Because you can have in, any kind of paganism or satanic world religion or, New Age crap. It's all, all of it's under that umbrella. It's all just satanic in any respect. But anyway, besides that, you have these different derivatives and these little nuggets of truth of what, Christianity can represent too. So there are good morsels of truth in these various aspects of, Athanatos, right? not Athanatos. I mean, in respects of Thanatos, right? An embracing of the world and an embracing of this death, because you could see these religions don't have, or these systems of belief or thought don't have they don't have very very good outcomes, very good points, and they're just lost and they're men amongst the ruins, right? To quote, to get more evil and right with it, right? Because I'm already bringing paganism into it, so I might as well mention Evola here and there. Um, so the problem with that is that these these various thoughts, these various tidings, these steps towards embracing of the devil, embracing of death, embracing of the things that are without Christ, right? That are Thanatos. Uh, and that's exactly what a character like Thanos with his Infinity Gauntlet represent, that tyranny, right? So the devil is that tyranny. That devil does have that tyranny over human beings, or he wants that tyranny over human beings. The problem is he doesn't have any real power over us. I mean, there's powers and principalities pushing for us, but the problem is that God has the power over all of it. God allows this devil to exist. Now, like I feigned back before, the characters in the Avengers movies didn't have a whole lot of control over what this Thanos did. They tried to stop the Thanatos from spreading, the death from spreading, but they couldn't because of his Iron Gauntlet. In a lot of ways, or the Infinity Gauntlet, or whatever. In a lot of ways, this is kind of the way that we have this power, these powers, and these principalities try to take us over with the passions, right? And that's just it. Whereas it's exoteric in the West. You have sin, you have punishment, and you have these complexities to it, right? So these complexities to it are, well, if I sin, I'm going to go to hell. If I take a sip of alcohol, I'm going to go to hell. If I, do bad things, I'm going to go to hell, right? And we're more honest about this in Orthodoxy. We don't know. We don't know. But obviously repent, obviously try to be a good person, obviously strive to find God, obviously strive to love God, obviously strive to love yourself, obviously strive to love and be kind to others. I mean, these are all kinds of obvious points, right? So, as you can see in the other world religions too, the other world religions, pseudo-religions, pseudo-systems of thought, all of that have altruistic intentions, and dare I say even communism does to various degrees. It does have some altruistic intentions for equality, right? So there are aspects of things to where there's these truths, to where there's these tried modalities of understanding. You know, even survival of the fittest in a way is a truth, because it's like, whose genes are going to carry on and whose genes aren't. Well, unattractive people versus attractive people, right? I mean, it's just a force of nature in a way, and that's not controlled by anybody but God, right? Or high IQ people versus low IQ people, right? There's that in idiocracy. There's that whole tangent too. And I'm playing obviously on some humanism here again, and some various degrees of epigenetics. There's all kinds of things I'm talking about with this one. But back to the Athanatos. And the Athanatos is what claims victory, is what proclaims Christ as king. And this truly is, to various degrees, the truth, the whole truth, the capital T truth. And the whole, where there's compromising for the world, these things where, people say, well, this is to various degrees, or like I said, as I said or pointed out tongue in cheekly, that's not the case. No, it is the truth. Like, it is something that's going to humble you. It is something that's going to de-radicalize you. It is something that does make you appreciate and try to look at things in a holistic perspective. It is a true embracing of what life is, of what the church is here to represent on earth, right? And his kingdom shall have no end. His kingdom is eternal. His kingdom is immortal. It's Athanatos. It's anti-death. It's trampling this death down by death. So with that being more so in the aspect of this is what is important to Christians. This is what is important to people who do practice other religions. Like, I mean, there are those nuggets of truth in those other religions, but they're not fully Athanatos. They are only parts, bits and pieces, piecemealed, are nuggets of truth, but nothing. No squirrels really finding any real nuts, right? And there's no pun intended with that, because obviously a squirrel's God's creature. But anyway, the squirrels are God's creatures. But anyway, that it in various respects there is this Athanatos, right? So you have the heroes, like I said before, hero's journey, which I'll probably do a cast on that with one of my good buddies. But regardless, there are various aspects where this Thanatos comes into play. And these various aspects come through the different world religions, right? They even come through in something as exoteric as Protestantism or Catholicism. They're not as hashed out or theologically rigorous as they are in Orthodoxy, because that's the true expression of the true faith. But the heterodox are close to the mark, and I'm not going to just dog on it just to dog on them. Another one of God's creatures. But in various respects, these nuggets of truth do get people to the whole truth, and it's so nice to see people who want to seek the kingdom, right? And it's in their hearts. And this is the Athanatos in a holistic aspect. This is the Athanatos in the divine liturgy. This is the Athanatos in God. And this is why there is this belief in God. And it's not a belief in some culturally Gnostic nonsense like a movie. It's not, believing in, like things that are just made up, like, what's something that's like Scientology. That's a good combination of something that's made up not only culturally, but obviously it's completely bunk. It's complete nonsense. But the Thetans, or whatever, you have to pay the church to, which is, talk about money laundering scheme. But you have to pay the church to get rid of those Thetans, whatever you call it, whatever they want to quantify it as. So you're literally paying somebody to rid original sin from aliens out of your soul, to purify you. If you ask me, if I want to go into business and make some money off of people who believe in obvious falsehoods, that's a good way to do it. But obviously, it's not with God. So right there, you're already using something of this world to pay for something. Thanatos. You're already using something for worldly gain. Thanatos. It's not an Athanatos, right? It's literally something that is destructive. It's literally something that is wrong. There's no metanoia. There is no true repentance. There is no prayer. There's obviously no God in that religion. Or, it's more systematic, really, than religion, which is weird to say, but it is. And for it to be all thoroughly fleshed out, this Thanatos, or this Thanos, he would be considered talk about Scientology, he would be considered an alien, right? And he would be considered a bad alien. I mean, this is how weird it gets here, folks. Though I mean, this is just how weird it gets. And the problem with this is that these belief systems are embraced wholeheartedly by the world, are embraced wholeheartedly by people who think they're brought up to believe these things. They're brought up to think these things through, and they think that this is the right way to go about it. Well, and there's this change, there's this turnaround, there's this metanoia with people who believe in God, with people who believe in Christ. And they can't believe that they do, right? And there's other aspects to this as well, but there's also various aspects of why orthodoxy and its Athanatos is the whole truth and is the unchanged truth, right? It hasn't changed like Protestantism. It hasn't changed like Catholicism. It hasn't even begun to replace anything, or be replaced that the West can dish out. The problem is that the West doesn't understand that asceticism. The West doesn't understand why there is such a deep richness to it. And like I pointed out, obviously, I'm going to go more in depth as as in depth as what's the Prudentialists did on the NPR articles, or on the NPR article, and Anglo Ortho did it too. I'm going to go, obviously, a little bit more in depth to that. They did a good job of it, though, too. They did it justice. But anyway, that's also neither here nor there. The thing is that when people realize these understandings, or want to embrace what God represents to them, and not just have it on a culturally Gnostic way, or an individualistic way, because in a way all that individualism can radicalize you. It can turn you into something that's Thanatos. It can turn you into an agent like Thanos, right? It can bring you, in a way, well, spiritual unsettling, spiritual death. I mean, not, their spiritual warfare is there, right? It's always constantly there, because the evil one never sleeps. But anyway, that's another, once again, another tangent. But anyway, there is a lot in this, and there's obviously a lot I'm unpacking, or maybe even opening up more for what it is on this podcast. But just into bridging this gap between Thanatos and Athanatos, this is obviously the point of doing this here. Now, with all that, the obvious pop culture implications are there. The pop culture implications that are negating of what Christians believe, and it's the most. I mean, it's the most attacked religion in the world. Not only on a theological basis, but on a philosophical basis, and also on the basis of just the common culture. I mean, look at all the persecutions the Greeks underwent, and the language was torn apart from the Ottomans. That's just one example of the Turks. And there's still rumors of the Orthodox Church being apologetic and or sympathetic to Islam. And when Islam is more embraced by the world, which doesn't surprise me, because it comes from the devil, than Christianity is, right? When the only valid religion is the Orthodox faith, right? Is the true faith of the true God, right? So when there are things that invalidate these different religions of the world, people get all bent out of shape. The problem with this is that when it's kind of the same concept if you go after like a political ideology or someone's favorite movie, or you just don't like what somebody likes as far as like their favorite food goes. You know what I mean? It's a variety of things. It could be, it's kind of anachronistic. It's also kind of anecdotal in a way because some of these standards can be, a bit anecdotal, and I don't like to go into those kind of anecdotes too far often. But anyway, despite all that, there are concepts at play with all of these things, with all of these thoughts, because of how, this is going to be a continued series. This is obviously not just one-offs about this, but conceptually, this embracing or this doing away with not embracing what is immortal, right? You're embracing something that is going to be embrace death, right? So in our culture, Thanos in a way is a perfect representation of that. Now, could you say, is he a perfect political ideological thing with all the wokeness that goes on with Marvel and the embracing of their supposed left wing ideology or their supposed presuppositions to whatever nationalistic movements you want to name, whatever kind of ridiculousness they can conjure up with, such as like NPR's hit pieces on the Orthodox Church, or even the Catholic Church, or just in general, right? As they want to marginalize more groups of people, and the concepts with that is I've attacked this as well with identity politics and how ridiculous that concept is, and it's all pretty much humanistic. But to get back to the more basic concepts is the Athanatos, or the immortal, is within God. It's also within ourselves too. But it's us wanting to become a part of God. And it's just kind of the same way we can identify with the theanthropic nature of Christ, because that was God's revelation to us of him becoming man. In the same way, we can embrace the heroes of the story, right? Because they're human beings. We see them as human beings, so they're fighting off the angels of death. They're fighting off, or what's going to bring us the doom and gloom to the universe, right? So they know just by taking the risk that they're going to sacrifice themselves, just like I mentioned earlier with the character of Tony Stark, Iron Man, or other various characters in the story, sacrifice themselves for, once again, the greater good and the greater good of humanity. That's a very hero thing to do. That's a very special thing to do, right? No matter the political ideology of the time, no matter the religion, there's hero stories within every culture, and those hero stories, essentially they're good for the soul, they're good for people, right? Because you need those stories, you need that uplifting positivity instead of all that overt pessimism, because that's essentially what embracing death is. It's going to eat away at you, and it's going to it's going to hurt your points of view. You're not going to feed your body McDonald's every day, because it's going to literally eat away at you, and you could probably die from it in a short amount of time. Or somebody's has a problem with an addiction, kind of the same concept, right? So anyway, that being said, there is obviously important components to this all. There's important concepts, as I keep saying the word conceptually. I probably keep messing that up a bit too. But the in essence is these concepts of these heroes, these heroic characters, overcoming this prevalent force of death, this prevalent Thanatos, to the universe, to what they probably can't control for the greater good because of his power, his infinity gauntlet, what he wields as even a god of death, as even someone who excuse me, someone who is various in their ways of becoming that death, of someone who has conceptually become something that is destructive. Somebody who has brought about death, somebody who has brought about so much destruction, and has had a very, very hard time with fighting these heroes because they fought them off for so long, and they continue to be a bulwark against him, be a bulwark against his bringing of his death. So it was his pride, his arrogance, his ultimate, the ultimate price that he paid for his destruction too. Like he obviously paid a big price for his revenge. Same thing with Satan. Same thing with the embracing of death. And as we say, the Satan and the evil things are of the world, right? So this, conceptually, this is very much a same concept that plays in and of itself with this one. So what winds up happening is these concepts play with themselves, right? They play off of one another, and even in a story as simple as heroes against just gigantic odds, against vengeful demigod or vengeful titan, as Thanos was known as, to just be completely complacent, to obviously want to rule with an iron fist, hence the Infinity Gauntlets, hence the tyranny. I don't know how many more puns I could probably make off of that. That conceptualize his embracing in that gauntlet of death, and of his comfortability with having the great death, having it across, the universe, right? And I already said that there was a death to the Ragnarok, death to the death to the demigods of Asgard, in the various pantheons of those religions, or of the pagans, the pagan pantheons. There's also various concepts of what is to be believed, throughout the world of all those tales, and then the tale at hand, the Marvel movie, and the metaphor, the allegory that I'm trying to paint with this picture. It's obviously important that these concepts are at play, because the more these concepts are at play, the more culturally, we see this embracing of, how important this all is, and how important the influence of, Christianity has been, the importance of different religions, different aspects, because without, Thanatos, Thanos wouldn't be there, and is as embracing of an angel of death mythos. The same as, there's many different variations of the theanthropic nature of Christ, and I'm not saying there's only one true God, one true Christ. But if you take, for instance, Mithras, the myth of Mithras, tried to copycat, tried to subvert, tried to be different in a very paganistic fashion against God, right? So when it breaks that first commandment and when it breaks off of the chain of command, pun intended, that this becomes very problematic for the church. Obviously, the culture is going to influence the church. Obviously, they're in a lot of ways, and what I mean by the culture influencing the church is that linguistically, more so than anything, linguistically. All the other aspects, obviously, the Orthodox Church has a very different understanding of it, and that's another tangent for another day. Again, I keep saying it. All these different tangents for different days. That's all well and good. But anyway, what I mean is, and as far as these tangents go, this Athanatos is embracing of the immortal, is embracing of God, is knowing the truth, is having that truth instead of tying the truth to a movie, tying the truth to something that you might think, well, it's obviously going to fade with the sands of time, and it's not going, it's conceptually not going to be something that is reliant upon embracing of any real truth, right? Capital T truth. There is going to be an embracing of something that is not in our purview as human beings, not in our purview as people who are going to have a real truth, right? If you keep searching for these things, and as I kind of put it in perspective with the movie, sure you have these heroes who are overcoming these insurmountable odds, and very humbly sacrificing themselves, right? In a lot of ways. Same concept as Jesus Christ, right? But in other ways, the same as what we know as heroes always coming to our rescue. And obviously, people who are, like I said in one of the other humanist, or the first humanist podcast, that we have those, thank God for those people who are truly self-sacrificing, doctors, police officers, firefighters, those people who are just selfless and truly selfless. Sometimes they pay the ultimate sacrifice, and that's unbelievable, right? That's unbelievable for anybody to appreciate. And people like that really are inspirational. But anyway, back to that whole concept of, because there is a positive aspect to some of these humanist concepts, right? There are positive aspects to some of this, right? This isn't all just, and then continually in a culture that is embraced, with a lot of these concepts that can embrace death. It's hard to overshadow a lot of stuff with negativity. It's a lot easier to just harp on the negativity and then just forget about the positive concepts. But you got to hand it to the people, as fictional as they are. The Avengers are obviously fictional, but you got to hand it to the people who want to are the real life heroes, and they obviously find it important to help others out, and God bless them for it, right? And thank God. But anyway, this is just more musings and more concepts that are kind of built upon these past couple ones as far as modernism go, as far as humanism goes, and then modernism as it applies to humanism goes. So, with that, that is all for now, and I hope that these become a little bit more of a momentum builder into the future, and then come back with a few more thoughts. But that's all conceptually speaking for what I have for now. Goodbye.